We're also trying for the first time this morning streaming to Facebook Live, so we'll see how that goes. We have quite a few who normally join us who aren't able to be with us this morning. Hopefully they'll be back next week. But we'll start our reading in verse 14. As we've asked in the past, if you would like to read, I'd ask you to go ahead and unmute your microphone. That way I'll know who to call on to read. So if your microphone's muted, I'll just pass you up and let the others read. If you have a comment or a question at any point during our time this morning, you feel free to unmute and ask your question. We'd be glad to have your comments or questions. So let's go ahead and start. We're going to read verses 14 down through verse 29. It's a rather lengthy reading, and we'll break that up. Let's see, Tad, do you mind reading with us? I see you're muted there, but I figured you would not mind to read. So 5 of us, there's 1, 2, 3. All right, let's read about 3 verses apiece. And I'll start with you, Tad, and then Jimmy, then Ronnie, Kyle, and then I'll finish up.
All right, verse 14.
Yes, sir.
When they came back to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. Immediately, when the entire crowd saw him, they were amazed and began running up to greet him. And he asked them, "What are you discussing with them?"
And one of the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought you my son, possessed with a spirit, which makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it slams him to the ground, and he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and stiffens out. I told your disciples to cast it out, and they cannot do it." And he answered them and said, "O unbelieving generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him to me."
They brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us."
And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible for one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, help my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again."
Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And he became as one dead, so that many said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" So he said to them, "This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting." So there's our story. I had someone visiting with us recently in a meeting, and I had mentioned a story in the lesson, and the lady had made a comment after the services that she had heard someone previously object to the use of the word story because maybe it gives off an idea that this is just a made up type of fairy tale. When we think of stories, sometimes we think of stories that we might tell children that aren't real. What would you all say to the idea of this being a fairy tale or a story in that sense?
No, sir, it's not. It's true.
If you've made it all the way to Mark 9 and this is your first objection that this is a fairy tale, that doesn't hold much water.
I use that term And I might understand why some people would object to it, but when we're talking about biblical stories, we're talking about accounts of real life events that have real life people in it. So if anybody's watching this later, or anybody here maybe has a problem with the word story, I do apologize for maybe using that, but please understand that I don't mean by any stretch of the imagination to indicate that this is not a real event that took place here. So in this event, it begins there talking about they've come to the disciples. Who has come? Where have they been? Just to get a little bit of a setting of where we are in time. Kyle, where were we last week? Where is Jesus and who was with them? Where did they come from?
Well, Jesus, along with Peter, James, and John, are returning from the Mount of Transfiguration, or what we call the Mount of Transfiguration, the mountain where it occurred. And so we would say in verse 11, when they came, that's the they we're talking about and where they came from.
And what we read here in the beginning of these verses is that while Jesus, Peter, James, and John are up on the mountain, there's some other things taking place down below the mountain. And Tad, what's been going on? What was the problem Jesus is faced with when they come back down off the mountain here?
The rest of the disciples, I'm assuming the rest of the 12 were down there, and someone had brought this afflicted child to them, and they were supposed to be casting out this demon, but they had not been able to.
Yeah. And would you necessarily expect just anybody to be able to cast out a demon like this?
You would not.
No. But why would they have an expectation that Jesus's disciples could have done it?
Well, at this point, they had been sent out on a limited commission. They had been doing some preaching already, and may very well have been preaching while Jesus and the others were up on the mountain.
Yeah. And later on, we'll see in the story that not only did the people expect the disciples could cast them out, the disciples themselves thought that they should have been able to cast out this demon.
Well, in
So-
chapter
Okay,
6
Kyle.
in chapter 6 and verse 7, they're given authority over the unclean spirit. So there was some expectation that they should be able to.
Yeah, that's a good point there. And
And if you add verse 13 to that in chapter 6, they were able to. So this wasn't an instance where this is the first time they've ever tried.
that's right.
They had some success doing this before.
Okay. Good point. So they've cast out demons. The people knew that they cast out demons, and they asked them to cast out this demon. But when Jesus and his disciples, Jesus, James, and John, Peter, sorry, get all those names in there. When they come down, everybody's running to them, and they're excited in maybe a bad way. And what's their concern? I think we see it there at the end of verse 18.
Yep.
So what is it, Kyle? What are they so, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you just a second. These first few verses, as you're reading it, you're letting this story kind of build in your mind. It seems that there's some urgency here, some concern. So what are they so concerned and urgent about?
Well, I would mention before we get to the urgency, this possession's not unusual either, or what's going on with the possessed man. It had different forms, but this was not unusual. What was unusual was verse 18, and I think where sort of why there's a moment for controversy here. The disciples were asked to cast out the demon; they weren't able to do so.
Yeah, they couldn't do it. So how does Jesus respond to that, Jimmy?
He told them in verse 19, he said, "O unbelieving generation, how long will I be with you? How long will I put up with you? Bring him to me." I guess he's talking to his disciples, is what I presume there. And it's kind of like the same thing. We look back when Peter was trying to walk on the water, and he lost his, he told Peter, hey, oh, ye of little faith. Evidently, somewhere down the line, Jesus is making telling them here that, evidently their faith or something that was going on, they just could not remove this spirit from this individual.
Okay. So yeah, I think the disciples included in that, maybe the brunt of Jesus's statement would apply to them. But I think the others around also, the fact that they're, so worked up here as if maybe there's nothing that can be done, then maybe, and the way he words it there, the faithless generation, that seems to be a very broad statement that's being made. We might expect after a statement like that, faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? We might expect him to say, y'all just need to go away. But that's not what he says. He says, bring him to me. So he talks to the Father a little bit here, and he asks about the length of this condition. How long has it been going on, Ronnie?
All the boy's life.
All his life. We don't know how old he is here, but for all his life, from childhood. And he goes on again to describe the types of things that have happened to him because of this affliction. And what does he ask for at the end of verse 22? He uses a couple of different words. What does he ask for there, Tad?
He asked for mercy and help.
Right. And when you see people who humbly come to Jesus throughout the gospel accounts, you don't find them coming demanding Jesus do anything. You find them asking very humbly and pleading in a way that shows they understand Jesus is the only one that can help in this case. And so what's Jesus's response to that? So the man asks for mercy or compassion and help. And what does Jesus say to him there, Kyle?
Well, he begins, at least in my version, the ESV, by saying, if you can, kind of quoting the man's preface to the request. And then he says, all things are possible for one who believes.
Yeah. The New King James, I understand some versions omit the word believe. The New King James says, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. And whether that's omitted in some translations or not, you still get the sense that that's what Jesus means when he says, if you can, all things are possible to him who believes. If you can what? Well, if all things are possible to him who believes, then I think that shows that the word does fit, whether it was there in the original text or not. So the Father says something very interesting. Right now, we're just kind of getting the story out there. I do want to come back in just a moment and discuss all these things, hear any comments that you have. But the Father has a very interesting response to Jesus's question of his faith. And so what does the Father say? He makes a statement, and then he follows that statement with another. What does he say there, Jimmy?
He said, I do believe, but also he asked him to help his unbelief.
Yeah, that's again, we'll come back and talk about that in just a moment, but it just seems kind of an odd thing for him to say. Like, yeah, I've got faith, but help me because I don't have faith. And I think we'll see that it's not exactly contradictory what he's saying there. But so then Jesus in verse 25, he sees the people coming. So apparently there's a large crowd coming here. And as we've seen before, Jesus is interested in drawing large crowds for the purpose of putting on a show. And it seems that as I'm reading through here, because these people are coming, he's wanting to go ahead and get this thing done before the crowds get too heavy. And so he cast out the demon And not only does he cast him out, but he gives a command to enter him no more, which is a very interesting thing that we'll talk about hopefully in just a few minutes. So the spirit comes out of him. The boy falls down. They think he's dead. He's not dead. Jesus took him up. And then they go into the house, and the disciples want to know, why couldn't we cast him out? And what was the reason Jesus gives?
Says something. He says, this kind cannot come out by anything but prayer.
All right.
So prayer, I mean, even when, we see this take place, we see Jesus, he looks up to the Father. I mean, he prays to the Father before he does any action to take this unclean spirit out of this boy. And we see him talking to the Father. So he's telling his apostles there, hey, this kind cannot come out by anything but prayer. I mean, I guess their problem was maybe it wasn't unbelief, but didn't have the faith that they couldn't do it. They didn't go through the right channels. They didn't pray to God for God to help them to take this unclean spirit out of this boy.
Yeah. Perhaps, well, let's back up. We're going to come back to this because I think this is a very important point that we need to discuss a little bit further. But let's just back up in the story and let's talk about what has happened. First of all, just talking about demon possession in general. As Kyle's already pointed out, this isn't the first time we've read about it. It's not the first time we've read about the disciples casting out demons. And so somebody reading through the book of Mark today might wonder, do we still experience demon possession today? Is this something that we could expect? I've seen some people do some pretty crazy things. Maybe they're possessed by a demon. And that's something that's on a lot of people's minds. So let's start right there and let's explore that question. Is demon possession still something that occurs in today's time? And I'll take a volunteer for an answer to that question. But understand that we can't just say yes or no and leave it at that. We have to explain scripturally why we would give the answer that we give. Bunch of humble people here. All right, Tad, I see your hand raised there.
No, you didn't, but I'll go ahead and fall on the sword if I need to.
I did see a hand. You might have just been stretching there.
Yeah, I must have been. I was trying to cover my face. I think, generally, I think at least, in our conversations, Brad, and most of the studying that I have done, my conclusion is that, demon possession does not happen today. And my reasons for that would be that the ability to cast out demons seems to be miraculous power that was given to the apostles on the limited commission, and then something that the apostles were able to impart later in the book of Acts to others. But really, in Acts chapter 8, my argument would kind of hinge on Acts chapter 8, where Simon observes that the apostles are able to impart spiritual gifts to others. And that was different from what Philip, who was preaching there before, had done. Philip could work miracles, but he had not been able to impart spiritual gifts. He was Philip the evangelist, not Philip the apostle. And so when the apostles came down from Jerusalem, they were able to impart these spiritual gifts, miraculous powers to the Samaritans. And that's what Simon the sorcerer got excited about. He thought that maybe he could buy that ability from the apostles, and Peter, rebukes him and said that it was not, he had no part in this matter, and he thought that he could buy the gift of God with money. My understanding is that only the apostles could do that after Jesus, ascended to heaven. And so once the apostles were gone, we could have maybe a longer discussion about, demon possession in the New Testament. But once the apostles were gone, miraculous powers were eventually going to fade away. And Paul even talks about that, I think, in 1 Corinthians 13. He's talking about revelation, prophecy and tongues, but he said that those things would eventually cease. And I think that fits with Acts 8. That's a crash course. But maybe that, just could start a discussion at least.
No, I think that's, again, for people who are maybe listening or even those who are here with us today, that's at least a good start for them to explore that understanding of how miracles were performed. The other thing that we see, and we've noted this throughout the book of Mark, when miracles are performed in the Bible, what's the nature of the miracle? How typically does that happen? Immediately. And the other word we might add to that is completely. Jesus didn't give anybody glasses. He didn't give anybody crutches. He didn't put them on a physical therapy plan. They were healed immediately, and they were healed completely. There are a lot of people claiming to perform miracles today. If they perform miracles today, shouldn't we expect, that they would look like the miracles that are performed in the New Testament? But they don't. I see Kyle shaking his head, but they don't. We don't see the nature of the miracles. We don't see dead people being brought to life. We don't see people with an ear cut off having that ear put back on miraculously. We don't see people who have been lame from birth not given standing up out of a chair and taking some, we don't see them getting up and walking immediately. So we don't see the kinds of miracles. We don't see the immediacy. We don't see the completeness. So if we don't see miracles happening like we do in the New Testament, can we conclude that there aren't being miracles performed like they were in the New Testament? And if it's not like they were in the New Testament, then they're not truly miracles. Does that sound like sound reasoning? Kyle, you had your hand up. I don't think
I completely agree with that. I completely agree with Tad's sort of, as you put, crash course. It is definitely a crash course in it. But one element I always try to include is, why were they being done in the first place? Why did Jesus perform the miracles? It was largely to either prove his identity or to prove his message. When the disciples were sent out with the powers that they had, the purpose of those signs were the same: to demonstrate that their message came from God, and that they could be, they were messengers of God. The prophets did similar things. Once the message has been verified, once it's been firmly established that, yes, this is from God, this is the gospel, then the need for those signs is also gone. The need to be able to cast out the demons. And you would say, possessions would have been limited after that. The miracles that are the so-called miracles of today, what's their purpose? There were lots of sick individuals in the region of Galilee when Jesus walked the earth that he did not heal. He wasn't there simply to do the miracles. The miracles proved something else. And if that something else is gone, then today they're really without purpose.
Those are all great points to be made. Another interesting thing, we don't see demon possession in the Old Testament, not the way we read about it in the New Testament. So this seemed to be something that God allowed, as has been stated, for Jesus to show his superiority over the demons.
That's it.
Now, we're gonna draw the conclusion here, there's not demon possession today. If anybody has a question about that, or maybe would like to teach us some things, feel free to contact us and let us know. But we're going to move on with the conclusion that there is no demon possession today. Is there anything going on today that we could look at this story, look at other cases of demon possession, and see some similarities so that we can come away from stories like this? I mean, obviously, we still come away with this story about seeing Jesus has complete power over Satan and his allies. That will always be seen. But I'm thinking perhaps there's another thing that we could take from this story: the lack of faith, the thing that Jesus says was needed in order to cast out a demon like this. Can you think of anything today that might control people? Not to the extent that the demons seem to have complete control over someone. And that person did not on their own possess the power to rid themselves of that. But is there anything you can think of today that has a controlling influence on people's lives, that destroys people's lives, that leaves parents, pleading, Lord, have compassion, help us? Does any of that sound familiar to things maybe that take place today that wouldn't be considered demon possession?
I mean, there's those people out there. I mean, I worked with kids in the school system that had convulsions. And I mean, they would even go through shaking like this boy here did. I mean, they would be shaking, they'd be foaming at the mouth. And
There are some sicknesses.
but they wasn't demon possessed.
Yeah, there are some
It's
illnesses.
a medical problem that,
Yeah.
that they had. And, but it wasn't like, wasn't like what we see here taking place.
Yeah, certainly not. And I really had not thought about that, but there are medical conditions and things where people, can't control themselves fully the way that they would like, or maybe their parents would like. But I'm thinking about something else that is far more common, and maybe something that we personally experienced.
Are you thinking about drugs or alcohol or something like that, Brad?
Yeah, those would be included. Yes, ma'am. I'm thinking about maybe sin in general, but those two things that you brought up are great examples of just the controlling influence, drugs and alcohol. And we don't have the time this morning for everybody to go around and give their personal testimony of experience with people like this. But if we had that time, I don't doubt at all that every one of us could give examples of people who were earnestly and genuinely trying, to do what was right, to make a change. But the addiction that they had just, held sway. It reigned supreme in their life, and they just didn't come out of that. Now, again, I think it's important for us to note that, those people who are addicted to whatever it is, the pleasures of the flesh, they have the ability, without a miraculous intervention, to rid themselves of those things. So there would be that difference between them today and this demon possession. But when you go on here and look at some of the things in the story, so the disciples had cast out demons earlier. Can we see from this story that there were some demons that were perhaps easier to cast out than others? Do you think that's a fair conclusion to draw?
And there was something about this demon that was beyond their ability, or you might say beyond their faith.
Okay, yeah.
At this point.
I like the way you worded that last, beyond their faith. Jesus doesn't say, well, this was a special kind that only the Son of God could cast out. He said it only comes out by, some versions say prayer, some versions say prayer and fasting. They had cast out demons before. They couldn't cast out this demon. This was a more difficult demon. If we're making a comparison between, that and sin, are there some sins that you commit, you recognize it, and you're like, that was foolish. I'm going to be very careful. I'm not going to do that again. And you don't. That's put behind you, and you've dealt with it, and you moved on.
I mean, to us as human beings, there are sins we think that are worse than other sins. But in God's eyes, sin is sin. Don't make no difference if it's a little lie or if you killed somebody. To him, sin is sin. And we need to look, I think we need to look at sin the same way God looks at it. Sin is sin. And instead of saying, well, he just told a little white lie, that's nothing really major. But hey, a little white lie, if you don't take care of the situation as a Christian, will keep you out of heaven.
It will. All sin.
I'm just saying that's.
But that,
That's
But I
the thing.
think, but wouldn't we understand and in our own experience with sin would tell us that if I've had trouble about lying, that would be easier for me to deal with than if I'm addicted to heroin and trying to kick that heroin addiction. So yes, all sin will condemn to hell. Some sins are easier for us to deal with and repent of than others. And so maybe we've dealt with some sin in our life that we felt like, we still we're relying on God to forgive that sin. We're relying on God to help us through. But then you come to some sin that you just feel like I can't get over this. I've tried and I couldn't do it. And is there a solution? Can we find anything in this story to help us to see that there is a solution? There is something that can help us to be able to come any sin in our life, no matter how addictive or powerful that sin seems to hold sway.
I think we need to pray to God.
Okay.
We've got to turn somewhere more powerful than ourselves,
Yeah.
which should be our approach always, but especially in those moments.
Yes. And, there, even within prayers, there's different prayers. There's prayers that we go to God and we ask, and, we feel confident that he's heard and we kind of move on. And then there's the prayers that we offer that are, very, it's not a 5-minute prayer. It's not a 2-minute prayer. We're praying and then we're going to pray some more. And it's lunchtime, but we're not going to eat because we're not done with this yet. And so we're going to keep praying, and we're going to pray, and we're going to pray, and we're going to continue to seek God's help. And at least for me, that's something that I see in this example here of, what Jesus is teaching. Even that father's response, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. There's a level of faith that we have, but we always want that faith to grow. And in this circumstance, I think the father recognizes I need greater faith here. And so he seeks that greater faith, and he asks the Lord to help him with that. And so if maybe we're struggling with something that just seems like we just can't get over this, this is controlling me, it's kept me in bondage for far too long, we might be tempted to just give up and give in. But there is another option, and that is to rely on Jesus, pray, and pray without ceasing about this thing, and trust that God's power can rid your life of that sin. But now Jesus says something interesting to the demon when he cast him out. What did he tell the demon?
Told him not to enter back into him again.
Yeah. So depart and don't enter, don't come back. Now we might feel like that with sin. We might say, get out of here and don't come back. But is Satan going to just say, all right, I've dealt with you long enough. I don't think I'll tempt you with this thing anymore. Is he going to be that?
Well,
No.
no, he's not, but he's got other angles that he's going to try to come and get you. I mean, he's going to, any weakness that he can see in you, that's how he's going to try to try to get you to do things. Yeah. I mean, you can say, okay, I'm going to quit drinking. I'm not going to drink no more. And, there's things that you're going to have to do that I've got to do to keep myself to get on this bandwagon, to stay off from drinking. One thing, I'm going to have to put away the friends. Don't throw a can of beer up in front of me. I'm alcoholic. Don't tempt me with that. But Satan, he's got other avenues that he will try to come and get you with. And I think that's the reason why we need to look in the Word of God, back in Romans, when we read about the armor of God. We've got something that we can put on, that we can carry. And, God has given us that as protection, and we need to be using it.
And that armor of God that Jimmy speaks of in Ephesians 6, that is a powerful tool at our disposal to both defensively and offensively to fight against Satan. But just know that he is going to come back. And if he's been effective for years in your life with this particular sin, know that he's going to come back with that sin. And he's going to continue to tempt you. And Jimmy mentioned the friends, if Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about one who lusts with his eye. And what does he say that person should be willing to do? This is in Matthew 5, verses 27 through 30, what I'm thinking about. There's other places. What does he say we should be willing to do in order to rid ourselves of those things that cause offense in our lives?
Look out your eye, cut off your hand.
But he didn't really mean that literally, did he, Tad?
Well, I mean, I think we could view it as hyperbole, but I do think the following statement is true. It would be better to enter into eternal life with a maimed body than to enter to hell with both eyes or both hands.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we truly understand what's at stake. We can view that as a statement of hyperbole or exaggeration for the sake of making a point. But I mean, I would rather be, it may be even hyperbole to think about being in heaven with one eye, but I'd rather be in heaven with one eye than to be in hell with two eyes.
Yeah. And the point is pretty clear. In order to rid ourselves of those things that cause us to stumble, is going to cause pain. And we may even feel, very limited by giving up something. But it would be better to do that than to go into hell, like you say, fully functioning. So our time is really up. As we're thinking about maybe those comparisons between demon possession and sin, there are some limitations to that comparison. But one thing that has not changed from the New Testament times till today, never will change, and that's the power of God to help those who seek him out and in faith want to serve him fully. And if we have that faith and we have that desire, he will help us. He will enable us. But we have to pray. We have to seek him for the riddance of whatever it is that we're trying to rid ourselves of, and then be committed to maintaining that faith and trying to increase our faith so that we overcome things in the future. Well, I appreciate everybody's time today. I appreciate everybody that's joined. I was really expecting to only have a couple of people today, so I'm glad that everybody showed up, and invite you to come back next week as we continue our discussion here in Mark chapter 9. Anybody have any questions or anything as we bring this to a close? All right.
It's the Christ showed his power over the apostles there, not bragging or anything, but the people could see that he was the ultimate power. He said that the apostles could do it. They could do it through prayer and fasting, but he just did it outright immediately and showed his power. The people did. I believe the people recognized that.
All right. As we continue on next
Definitely.
week in chapter 9, we're going to see some other things that'll kind of bring us back to this story a few times. Kyle, did you start to say something?
No, I was just going to say I agree. I think there's a good comparison to be made between the disciples and Jesus. The crowds come running because they think these men that follow Jesus fell short, so maybe Jesus is going to fall short too. It's an implication on his power, and he addresses that outright. He says, "Get out and never come back," and that's exactly what happens. Sometimes we can we can be in the place of looking to a follower of Jesus and be disappointed. And sometimes we can be that person that disappoints. All of us are still growing in our faith. And if we all turn back to the source of that faith, we won't be disappointed in him. So I think that's something to note.
Okay, appreciate that. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and say goodbye for now. Look forward to being with you all next week.